Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. My name is Michael VanHartingsveldt, as I was introduced. I've been at LACMA for about a year and a half now. 1 year of that was spent being a curatorial and research intern with the Pavilion for Japanese Art. And there I was given stacks upon stacks of book to read by Hollis Goodall, who's a curator there, and is sitting in the front row right here. So she's been integral to the research that I've been doing, always putting me in the right direction on things to research, what to know, what to learn, how to pronounce things. That's a big part that I've been practicing. And she's been sort of putting me on the right track to working towards a career in art appreciation, especially from Japan. And currently I'm working as a collections management technician at LACMA. I get to handle a lot of the artwork there personally. So sometimes I have to be nudged on the shoulder, be like, Michael, you need to get to work. You can't just admire the pieces. And I'm very excited to be presenting this. This is a topic that I've only recently really become interested in, but have been pouring a lot of energy into researching. And I'm excited to share it with you. So a background on Buddhism in Japan. Japan was one of the last countries in Asia to actually have Buddhism enter it. But it is also one of the countries that really keeps the traditions of Buddhism going very strongly. They've become very integral to the way of life here, or in Japan. So, Buddhism in Japan was introduced by emissaries from the Baekje Kingdom of Korea around the mid-6th century. These emissaries, they came over, and at first they were met with a lot of pushback. You did not want to, the current government at the time did not want to replace the more indigenous religion of Japan at the time, and they preferred to keep that indigenous religion and have this new religion. They wanted to keep it away because they thought it would change too drastically the way of life there. But with a little bit of help of very wealthy patrons, and also with a couple epidemics, Buddhism took hold in the country and was able to become a more concrete part of the history of Japan. Now, when I say epidemics, I don't even say that as a joke. I mean it quite seriously. There was an epidemic, and they believed it was because the Buddhism had been brought in originally, and there was an epidemic, and so they thought it was the reason that the epidemic happened was because of Buddhism. So then they ejected it. So because of these epidemics, they actually ceased when Buddhism came back in again with another image. And it was these images, the construction of the first temples and such, were funded by wealthy patrons such as Prince Shotoku and the Soga clan. And they were able to put down the money, and with this money they were able to build some of the first temples in Japan dedicated to Buddhism. One of which is the Shitenoji, which is in Osaka, and there are several others, the Yakushi, and Asukadera. These are all places that are available to even visit nowadays. Now, so around the 6th, 7th century, there were 6 sects of Buddhism: Hoso, Jojitsu, Kegon, Kusha, Ritsu, and Sanon. And these were not so much doctrinal schools, but rather academic schools. It was Buddhism for the court, Buddhism for the imperial family, less so for the commoners. And the provincial temple system was established under Emperor Shomu, who ruled from 724 to 749. And he is most notable for his construction of the Todaiji, and other great temples around as well. In the early 9th century, 2 very important figures returned from China from their studies there of the esoteric Buddhist schools, Kukai and Saicho. They came from China. They had gone there originally from Japan to study. Saicho went to study the Tendai school of Buddhism, and Kukai went to study what would become the Shingon school of esoteric Buddhism in Japan. And they brought back a wealth of scriptural translations and new iconography, and Kukai founded Shingon and Saicho founded Tendai. So the late Heian and Kamakura periods, they saw the introduction. So this is roughly around the 11th, 12th century, around that time. They saw the introduction of three main schools of Buddhism: Pure Land, Zen, and Nichiren. And right now, probably the most popular school of Buddhism is the Pure Land. And we'll get more into the reason why that is a little bit later on when we talk about the most popular Buddha in that school. So who exactly is a Buddha? As was said earlier, a Buddha is not so much a name as it is an honorific. Buddha, when people think of Buddha, they think of either the laughing fat Buddha, that you rub its belly and it gives you good luck, or you think of a very austere ascetic sitting there in meditation talking about the truths of life. But really, Buddha is a name, a title that is affiliated with hundreds of deities in Buddhism. And so a Buddha is somebody, pretty much anybody who has gained enlightenment. In Japanese, that's satori. They've achieved satori, and they are a knower of the truth. So anyone who has recognized the fundamental truths of life, that there is suffering, that there is a way to cease suffering, and that a way that you can cease suffering is through following an eightfold path of activities, which includes the right state of mind, the right behavior, the right thoughts, the right actions. Now, a Buddha is also somebody who has broken free of the cycle of rebirth. Now, does anyone know what I mean by cycle of rebirth? Yes, in the back.
Reincarnation.
Exactly. What is reincarnation?
When you're like, if you're good in your life, you get reborn as something better.
Okay.
But if you're bad, you get reborn as something worse, like a bug or something.
Yeah, that's actually perfect. Thank you so much. So one who has broken free of the cycle of rebirth is somebody who has moved either up the karmic cycles or moved down. So there are 6 realms in which you could be reborn, ranging from hungry ghosts and demons all the way up to a bodhisattva or a deity and a Buddha. Once you've hit the level of Buddhahood, that's when you've broken free of the entire cycle and you are able to live your life out in nirvana. There are 32 signs of an enlightened Buddha, though not all are physical features. I am not going to go through all 32 signs, but some of them are easily visible on this sculpture at the side here. So this is a bust of Amida Butsu. This is from the Kamakura period. And one of the symbols, one of the signs of the enlightened Buddha is this usnisa. That is a cranial protuberance to show the expansion of knowledge. Then there is also the urna. The urna is a third eye, a place where radiance emanates from in the forehead. And then another is these elongated ears. And these elongated ears are a hearkening back to the princely origin of Siddhartha Gautama. He was born a prince, but he gave up all of his wealth. He gave up his life of luxury to seek truth, to go through suffering. And so the jewelry that he would have worn on his ear would have weighed down his ear so much that it would have pulled it and stretched it. And so that is one of the signs of opulence. And since he has since given up all of this wealth, he just has stretched out ears. Other symbols that you would see on the rest of his body, some sculptures depict the Buddha with webbed fingers and webbed toes. Other descriptions of him in these scriptures, he's got a hair coming from every pore in his body. He's got 40 teeth that are exactly the same size. His 4 canines are much longer and sharper than a regular human being's. And so these are all, and then it's not all physical either. Some of it is talking about the color of his eyes, but also the booming baritone of his voice. How his voice could be heard for miles because it was so loud. And so there are 32 signs where if somebody fit every single one of those, sure, you could probably call the Buddha. And so a lot of these Buddhas can be found on mandalas. Now these are mandalas that were brought to Japan by Kukai and by Saicho. These are probably the most famous mandalas in Japanese art history. This one here is the Kongokai, the diamond world, and this is the Taizokai, which is the womb world. The diamond world is a sort of crystallized representation of the cosmos and the place of the central cosmological Buddha at his proper place. The womb world, instead, is got Dainichi Nyorai at the center of it, and from him all of his physical manifestations. And so here you have his manifestations, which are the Buddhas at these cardinal points, and then his bodhisattva emanations, which are at the points in between. And so you can see that there are a lot of deities on these. So many so that I'm not going to take time to name them all off for you, though I absolutely could. And these have become sort of these have been copied by many different schools of esoteric Buddha, or different temples of Buddhism. So these can be found in different temples across the Japanese archipelago. And these are used during the initiation rite of Buddhism. And so as you're going through this initiation rite, at the end of it, you are asked to take a blossom and throw it onto these gridwork mandalas, and where your blossom falls, that becomes your tutelary deity. That's the one that you dedicate your life to. So without further ado, we're going to get into the different Buddhas. We're only going to be dealing with 5 Buddhas in this talk, even though there are hundreds. We're only going to talk about 5 because these are the 5 most prominent you would see in Japanese imagery. So the first is Dainichi, the Buddha of the cosmos. Anyone who has visited Todaiji will know exactly what I'm talking about because he is the deity enshrined there. So Dainichi, it translates literally as great sun. He is the source of all light. He shines his light upon the people. He illuminates our lives. And he originated in India as Vairochana, or also Mahavairochana. The Chinese is Dari, and the Korean is Dai. And the reason I'm giving you the Chinese and Korean names is because the transmission of Buddhism did come through both China and through Korea. And so I think it's very important to know those names as well. So up until the advent of esoteric Buddhism, which was during the early 9th century in Japan, he was known as Viroshana, which is a transliteration of the Chinese Piroshana. And the name Dainichi actually came over with Kukai and Saicho. He generally acts as a substitute for Shakamuni, who is the historical Buddha in esoteric traditions. And he's a rare exception to the rule. Normally, Buddhas are seen in very simple attire, no jewelry, no crown on their head, almost looking like a monk. But because Dainichi is sort of Lord of the cosmos, the center of all light, he is shown wearing a crown and also fairly bright jewelry. Dainichi embodies the 6 elements: earth, water, fire, air, space, and these are all activated by the mind, which is the sixth element in spiritual consciousness. And he was favored by the Emperor Shomu, who reigned, those are his days that he reigned. Now, when symbols of Viroshana first entered Japan, it was during the Nara period, and the Nara period was happening at the same time that the Tang dynasty was happening in China. There was an empress whose specific name currently eludes me, but there's an empress who believed herself to be the physical manifestation of Vairochana, and so what she ended up doing was creating an image of Vairochana at the Longmen grottos. And so this one on the left is a sculpture of Vairochana in China. And here is a sculpture done by Unkei, one of his earliest extant pieces. Unkei was a very famous 14th or 13th century sculptor in the Kamakura Kei school of carving. And one of his first sculptures that he ever made was of Vairochana, of Daiichi. And you can see here, he is a Buddha, but you can see the crown on his head. You can see the elongated ears, which are a symbol of a Buddha. And he's forming something called a mudra. A mudra is a sacred hand gesture. And the specific name this is the mudra of the six elements, or more easily in English, it's known as the knowledge fist. And later on in this talk, I'll actually have diagrams on how to perform these yourselves, and then we'll kind of practice those together. Because muscle memory will help you remember how to identify these deities later on.